Welcome to another episode of The Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor, Senders. If you'd like to do cold email deliverability correctly, hit the link in the description. But without them, it would not be possible to do these really cool interviews with cool people like Kelly. What's going on?
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Blake. I'm excited to be here and talk about leadership and how to grow it.
Yeah, I'm really interested also in like we were talking about a little bit. I think it's an unexplored. It's not too deeply explored the impact of leadership capability on growth because a lot of people talk about tactics and stuff like that. But before we get into it, if you could just give a brief introduction of yourself and what you're building.
Sure. So I'm a leadership coach. I've been running my own leadership coaching business for about 15 years now. I'm based on the East Coast of the US, work with leaders across the US and across the world, mostly in mission driven organizations. And I believe in helping people move from being burned out and overextended to being energized and confident about their leadership skills so that they can have the freedom to focus on very highest priorities of their organizations. So
How
that's
did
that.
how did you end up transitioning into this business?
Yeah. So my previous career, I was a professional development manager for a consulting firm and a couple of law firms. So I would help the growth of the consultants and lawyers in those organizations. But I didn't have the chance to really work with them one on one in a tailored way. So I moved out of that and built my own business in leadership coaching so that I could provide that kind of tailored support that I think we all need when we transition into a leadership role.
Has at that point in your life was entrepreneurship something that was familiar to you, or was it like a totally new, jump into a new universe type of thing?
Totally new. I was a recovering English major, right? Like I didn't know anything about starting a business or what entrepreneurship was. I just knew the end goal of what I wanted to achieve, which was being able to provide this kind of leadership coaching service. So then I just had to work backwards and educate myself on what it means to build a business, what it means to have an entrepreneurial mindset, why, and keep reminding myself why that was so important to me.
So how were the first like the first few years of it then, figuring out the first few clients that you had? I guess you had some clients from work that you had done in your previous job and referrals or things like that, or was it mostly new relationships after that?
Yeah, I had a network certainly from my previous jobs, but I didn't have clients. So one of the many things I had to learn was how do you convert people you know into clients that you serve? Um, and so the first few years were really hard. All right, there was a lot of learning, there was a lot of mistakes. I remember telling someone, I think I've made every mistake, right? Which I think is important to do, right? Because then you learn most everything, or at least you become aware of
Yeah.
what you can do to improve. But it was all part of the growth of it, and I think that gave helped give me an even deeper appreciation for my clients now, who are leaders who are also trying to learn. They're also trying to grow. And so they will make a lot of mistakes. But the question is, how much can you learn from those without ruminating about them?
So how in the 15 years of your business, very standard, a lot of difficulty at the beginning. It's awesome that you pushed through it. That is so cool. I'm so glad that you're here now. And how has your understanding of your why changed? Because you said at the beginning you really wanted to present a tailored uh, leadership coaching experience. Has that changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. It has changed, or I should say, it's been supplemented. So in the beginning, as I said, it was helping leaders in a tailored way develop their leadership style. That is my big why, right? Like we spend a lot of time at work. How can we use that time in a way that feels personal and authentic to us as individuals and meaningful? What I've learned what I've added to that why since then is also the mission that those leaders are driving in their organizations. So that is why I focus on mission driven organizations, because if a leader can grow and perform a little bit better than he or she has in the past, then the organization can perform better, which means they can serve their mission better. And that's deeply meaningful to me, right? Because I recognize that I am one of the links in the chain that cause that chain reaction.
So like you said, was it uh and I think that's something that's also really awesome. And I personally, like in my own agency, orient my focus around mission driven or impact driven, leaders, things like that. But has it been like that from the start, or did that become a focus of yours at some point in your trajectory?
Yeah, no, it did evolve, and it evolved out of a recognition that the leaders I was serving, if they wanted to change, they needed to link the change to their mission, because change is hard, right? And we're not going to change unless we are given a prize, a carrot, something meaningful in return for all of the effort, whether it's deciding to go to college and putting in all of our effort to learn how to be a good student. We're going to get something in exchange for that, right? We're going to achieve our mission of getting a diploma or getting a broader knowledge base of some field. Same with leaders. Leaders can change their behavior, but they need to do it for the sake of something meaningful. And that is usually the mission of their organization. If it's not the mission of their organization, they should probably look for a different company or organization to be part of. But when I recognized that they needed that catalyst in order to change, that's when I realized my coaching approach should be geared towards that goal as well. Not only how can I serve you, the leader, to be better, but how can we together make your mission more achievable, more likely.
So then I guess because like when I read things on your website and stuff, and it says mission driven, to me that automatically means something socially impactful, environmentally impactful, something like that. But is what you're saying that the mission aspect of that language that you use, or the mission aspect of your coaching and stuff, has to do with the mission of the individual, not necessarily that I
Mm,
guess more common, I mean, I
mhm.
don't know if it's more common, but I guess just what I assumed, was your definition is that type of mission. So when you say mission, is it that, or is it the mission of the individual?
It's both and. So yes, it can be just the mission of the individual. The leader might have a mission of, I want to create a safe, open, and supportive team environment. Great. That can be a mission that we are driving towards. And that can exist whether the organization is in the nonprofit sector or the private sector or the public sector. And or it can apply to the mission of the organization, which is stating some social cause, right, that they are advancing for the betterment of the planet. Now, even private sector companies are often driven by mission, right? We can see that from Ben and Jerry's to Patagonia to other big companies will say that they have a triple bottom line, right? So they have the bottom line of making profits, but they also have a third line of making a positive social impact in the world.
So then this is like a bonus question for me, because I love talking about this type of stuff. Before we get into the, because I do want to ask you about what you've learned and recent research that you've done. But right before we do that, given this conversation, when you say, because I struggle with this myself, is when you say that you are oriented towards mission driven leaders, how do you define that for yourself? How do you define whether a person or an organization is mission driven or not mission driven? Because it could be driven by a mission that doesn't maybe subjectively have anything to do with like a positive social impact. How do you define that for yourself?
Yes, yes. I ask them, when they think about the work that they do, I ask them, you do this work for the sake of what? For the sake of what do you do this work? And if they can answer me in a way that shows it is a cause, a goal, a mission that is deeply meaningful to them, then I know this can be a great coaching relationship, because I know they are being driven by something meaningful and important to them. That's that's how I define mission driven, and kind of what it looks like or sounds like to me.
So then, building off of that definition, what is some of the recent work that you've done reflecting on uh, all your experience with mission-driven leaders as far as navigating change? Because there's been a lot of opportunity to do that recently.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, yeah, what's one of the things that is either most interesting to you or something that you've found to be most passionate about in your findings?
Yeah, yeah. So just to give a quick background on the research, I had noticed that as I was working with leaders over the last 12 months or so, that they were really struggling to make impact on those missions. They still believed in the mission, they still believed in their teams, but they just weren't able to get traction and make progress on it. And so I decided to conduct a series of research interviews to understand more specifically what was going on with them. And I talked to leaders across all three sectors and came away with some findings. And they were divided into three buckets: how leaders were currently describing this current state that they were in, facing all of this change and uncertainty. That was the first bucket. Then findings around what their desired future state was, like what they wanted to move towards that they felt would help them better navigate these uncertain times. And then from that, I developed tools, coaching tools or approaches to use to help them move from that current state to that desired future state. So that's the overview of what the research looked at. The findings were that in that first bucket of how leaders were experiencing these times of change and uncertainty, not surprisingly, they were extremely in states of confusion and ambiguity that was causing them to suffer a dip in confidence. Right? Because when we are uncertain about what's going to happen out in the external world, the impact on us internally is we might feel we're not up to the task, or we might not feel ready to respond to whatever it is. So they were suffering some levels of crisis of confidence. The other thing they were feeling in their current state was that they were always reacting and firefighting. Again, very normal reaction in times of change. But the result was that they weren't able to be strategic anymore. They weren't able to spend as much time looking ahead because they were trying to deal with the fires that were happening right there today, which incidentally that linked back then to their confidence issue, because they're like, I know I'm not paying attention to the long term, and that worries me. And so that would also erode their confidence. And then, thirdly, not surprisingly, both of these were causing exhaustion and burnout. People were feeling drained and overwhelmed and unable to show up fully, which would result in anxiety about not being able to support their teams. So, these three big kind of thunderclouds of negative emotions were what was causing people to not be able to get traction on serving their missions. So, let me pause there and see if you have any questions, and then I can talk about how they describe their desired
Oh,
future
just
state.
about a million. But so the just to be concise, the three thunderclouds that you were describing was that there was a feeling of confusion or ambiguity, a feeling of being reactive, and then remind me what the
Exhaustion
oh, the
and burnout.
burnout as a result. So could you give maybe um because it's funny with things like this, with things like confusion or maybe burnout or something. I think it's they're words that everybody could use to describe how they could feel, but at the same time they're kind of ambiguous. Eh, I guess like um it kind of meta, but they are like ambiguous concepts. They can be. Is there a specific example, either one you can make up or one that you navigated with somebody, where this confusion ambiguity was presenting itself, but it wasn't they weren't maybe specific, they needed your help to specifically define it or recognize it. Like, what does it look like when confusion or ambiguity shows up in someone's work?
Yes, yes. An example pops right to mind. So I had a leader whose team was very upset and anxious about the conflict in Gaza. And they approached the leader and said, "What is our organization's stance on Gaza?" Now, this organization has nothing to do with peacekeeping or diplomacy or international affairs. They work in a completely separate sector. It's somewhere in the tech world. So she's like, "Well, we historically don't take a stance," but she didn't know what to do, right? Because one, you could try to take a stance because that is what a lot of companies are doing now. Two, you could decide to not take a stance because you're, plural you, the organization isn't an expert in this field at all. Three, they have a diverse constituency that they serve. And if they take a stand, they might upset one faction of that. So, yet, they have organizational values around transparency and being open and um, something around like supporting positive growth in the world. So, and she also wants to be responsive to her team. So there are like two or three different paths she could take that all have pros and cons that led to a great deal of confusion and ambiguity about what direction to go
So
in.
then, when you talk about the second bucket, the desired state, what are some examples? I mean, I guess you could just, because I
Yeah.
really enjoyed how you laid out the framework of the first bucket, but as far as the second one, how do you go about that conversation describing a desired state?
Yeah. So what they described was wanting to have that clarity and confidence again about which direction to go in. They felt it would, they wanted to have that kind of focus in regards to the reactivity and the firefighting. Again, they wanted to be proactive, right? They wanted to, kind of get their agency back. Because when we are in reactive firefighting mode, somebody else is essentially controlling what we do, right? Dictating what we do. And that is a very uncomfortable and vulnerable feeling for a leader or an organization to be in. And then the third one, exhaustion and burnout, they wanted to move to being energized and supported. It is, what is it, the crown rests heavy, right, on the leader. And so when we are in times of uncertainty and change, our team isn't often thinking about, sending notes of appreciation to our leader, understandably, because they're just trying to maintain their own emotional health. So they they wanted to be back to feeling energized and supported by their own
So
teams.
then I guess to wrap this segment, I think it would be awesome if, I mean, obviously a very sustainable solution to navigate from this one bucket to the other one is to work with you. And so I think aside from that, if you could just offer some high level maybe exercises or tactics that somebody could use to not only check themselves and then maybe discover that they're even in a state, because it may just arise as stress or like blanket stress or anxiety. And so if there are a series of questions or like an exercise that you could go through to say like, okay, well, I'm stressed and anxious, obviously, but why? Oh, well, I'm confused about this. I find myself reactive instead of proactive in this situation. And then also if you could just, after that, so the two things would be just something someone could do themselves, but then also how you typically navigate that with somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for the first bucket around gaining more clarity and confidence about what direction to go in, I often talk to clients about identifying their chaos values. So, chaos values are the values that we want to exhibit in times of chaos. And what I mean by that is we each carry with us a whole set of values that are important to us. And we draw on different values depending on what the situation or the environment calls for. And when we are in times of chaos and uncertainty, we all have a subset of those values that is most important to us. So there's a free assessment online. It's called True Values. I'm not affiliated with it at all, but I use it all the time. That's something that people can go to determine their full set of values. And then from that, I'd encourage them to think about what are the values most important to me during times of chaos. So that's one tool. A second tool for being proactive and keeping a strategic long term view of the direction of your organization is a mindset tool, and it's called Going on the Balcony. And going on the balcony means that you remove yourself, at least emotionally and mentally, from the chaos and change that is happening down here on the stage. And you observe what you want to happen. What direction do you want these players down on the stage to go in? Just as you would when you're watching a play, you can either be an actor down on the stage and you can be caught up in the emotion and being fairly reactive to what's happening around you, or you can go up to the balcony where you have a little bit of emotional remove, enough that you can more calmly see and confidently see what direction to go in. And the best leaders will rotate back and forth between those two spots. They'll spend time down on the stage, they understand what's happening, and they'll also spend time up on the balcony where they can get that longer um, kind of confident view. And then the last tool that I would offer to feel energized and supported by your team, to kind of counteract that exhaustion and burnout, is something I call the magic delegation question. So, the magic delegation question is when you feel you are overwhelmed and there is too much on your plate to do, ask yourself this question: what on my plate am I uniquely qualified to do? Keep those things, and everything else, try to delegate or defer. Because if there are items on your plate that only you are uniquely qualified to do, you need to do those. And those are your top priority. But everything else can either be deferred to a later time or delegated to someone else for whom it will be a growth opportunity to learn how to do the thing. That's my quick review of 3 different tools that leaders can use to navigate these times.
Wow, these frameworks they feel really clear and organized. So I appreciate these. So again, just a review. So we have the unique delegation, or I don't think that's how you titled it, but it was
Magic delegation question,
thank you,
right?
magic delegation
It
question,
makes the other things disappear.
which it makes it, but very specific what you need to delegate and what you shouldn't.
Exactly.
And then the balcony, what's the
Going
name
up
of
on
it?
the balcony.
Going up on the
Yep.
balcony to remove yourself emotionally from what's happening so that you can have a bigger picture, more strategic view, which I think links to the being proactive, reactive segments as well.
Absolutely.
And then the last one was chaos values, which sounds mathematical, but I guess it's being able to define further your values in order to navigate, to make decisions in chaos that are
Yes.
associated.
Take look at all of your values and find the subset of your values that you want to exhibit during times of chaos.
Awesome.
And you're probably right, Blake. There's probably a link to chaos theory in there somewhere, but that would be a whole other podcast.
Wow, Kelly, that is so awesome. I genuinely appreciate you sharing that framework. I think that is really specific. I mean, it's clear how you described it, and people can use them. So I'm really excited to continue expanding on that. I have 2 final questions I'm excited to hear your perspective on. The first thing is shifting gears back into your own experience growing your own business. At this time, at this moment, what is the biggest challenge that you're facing, and how does it also present an opportunity?
Yeah. So my biggest challenge is identifying and finding my niche. So my niche is leaders who are excited to engage in this type of growth. And it's a challenge because, like, how to attract people like that, right? I do believe in more of a magnetizing approach to marketing as opposed to just kind of spray and pray marketing. So that's the challenge. And the opportunity, of course, is, when I can attract or find, where such people hang out, then the opportunity is great because then we can go far because that's the perfect fit client for me. So we're off at that point,
Nice.
and can tackle their goals.
Well, that's I think that's I think that being a main challenge that you're navigating at the moment is a proxy for things. There is opportunity for you. There is growth, and so I'm excited for that. And related to that question, I'm curious because you wake up every day and you do this and you figure it out and you have been. What inspires you?
What inspires me? So there's a quote that one of my mentors told me a long time ago where he described how if he got to the point where he would wake up and not learn something that day, that they might as well just put me in the ground, he said. And I really think that if I can learn something each day and I always do at every coaching session I lead, I learn something. I mean, that's inspiring. I'm curious, right? Like there are a billion things to learn out in the universe, and I've learned like this many so far.
Yeah, yeah.
So like I'm so curious about all the rest of it.
Well, I mean, I think you've if I didn't do anything else today, if I was only awake for these 30 minutes, I've successfully done what you're doing. So thank you for being a vehicle for that in my life today.
It was my pleasure. I love talking with you and yeah, exploring these topics. They're endlessly curious to me.
Yeah. If there was somebody that was inspired to follow your journey or reach out, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, but you can also go to my website, opencirclecoaching.com. That's opencirclecoaching.com and click on newsletter. And then you can sign up and receive my monthly-ish newsletters where I always talk about something, some topic or tool related to leadership, either organizational leadership or self-leadership.
Awesome. Well, that sounds good. Well, Kelly, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to keeping up to date with how specific you're getting with your niche, and then also this framework. I think could be really useful to people. So I'm glad that this could be uh, hopefully expose some people to that, and I'm excited for you to do the same. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Blake. Take care.
You got it.